My name is Kasandra James. I am the Director of Programs at Volunteer Toronto. This evening, I'm going to tell you some stories, like my ancestors told stories, as a form of knowledge sharing and connection and community building. Centuries after being trafficked to the shores of the Caribbean, stories are how we come to know who we are and how we learn to care for each other. My favorite story of community making is one my mother loves to tell. My entire life, she has told stories of leading her church's senior choir when she was just a teenager. It is a foundational story of her community life. And she continues to play and compose music, teach others, and lead choirs until this day. I learned how to make community, but unfortunately not how to play any instruments, by my mother's stories and her example. When I moved to Canada, I learned a new story of community making. The story of volunteerism was complicated. Volunteer to learn the Canadian way. Join cultural groups for belonging and safety. Volunteer to get work experience. Like many newcomers, I found the story of volunteering to be daunting. Still, volunteering has been a winding path to social and economic integration for me and for many others. I can trace my presence on this stage back through that story of volunteering. However, I want to be clear that heartwarming, successful stories of volunteerism cannot overshadow the convoluted, often broken, and sometimes harmful experiences of volunteering in the lives of young people and newcomers, Black and Indigenous communities, seniors, persons with disabilities. At Volunteer Toronto, we most often engage people who are facing barriers to their desire to volunteer. Last year, 50% of those people had been in Canada less than 12 months. Even before newcomers arrive, the federal government tells them to volunteer explicitly, and I quote, "to show potential employers that you're willing to work hard." This story that volunteerism is intricately tied to newcomers' ability to work in Canada is retold in our settlement agencies and our job programs, and in the volunteer roles of nonprofits. We tell similar stories to young people. Here in Ontario, we require all our high school students to do 40 hours of community service in order to graduate. And I'm well aware that some of you may be thinking, these are excellent initiatives that foster civic engagement through volunteerism. And how could that be a bad thing? Well, have you asked the refugee expectant mother who is looking for a home and a doctor and a job what being told to volunteer means for her? What about the Indigenous student that just learned that he cannot use his time in ceremony towards his service hours because no nonprofit was involved in that process? Too often, the feel-good stories of volunteerism can mask real, persistent othering of communities that do not look like or show up as the narrowly defined, colonially constructed story of volunteerism that we tell here in this country. And the harm that that causes is not just to these communities, it's to Canada itself. We'll take Ontario as an example. When the government created the 40-hour mandate, the goal was to foster youth civic engagement by forcing young people to volunteer. What do we have more than 25 years later? Formal volunteerism is down, donations are down, and as evidenced by our last two provincial elections, voting is also down. The first cohorts of that mandate are 40-year-olds. Are they more civically engaged? Has anyone asked a teenager what they experience with this mandate? For many, it's a necessary nuisance, but for others, it is an obstacle to their graduation. we hear similar sentiments from newcomers. The story of volunteerism that we tell them is one of transaction. Do this unpaid labor, and maybe we'll give you access to a job. Maybe we will consider your experience from other places as valid. Maybe we'll consider you Canadian enough to work here. And the result is that newcomers and young people get what they need from this system that we've forced them into, and then they get out. And I want to be clear here that I'm not saying that young people and newcomers are civically disengaged. Many people are making community in ways that look unfamiliar and do not fit into our charitable model. They are practicing community in ways that don't require formal institutions or taxable donations or volunteer managers. They don't rely on the transfer of time and resources from those who have more to those who have less, but are instead built on deep reciprocity and philosophies like Ubuntu and all my relations and collective liberation. At Volunteer Toronto, we have been privileged to see some of those stories up close. In 2023, we partnered with the Toronto Foundation to support 35 initiatives across the city of Toronto with $1,000 microgrants. Our goal, to reduce social isolation and build connection in Canada's loneliest city. None of our applicants had to provide a charitable number or give us their SIN number or even actually be a real organization. Many of the groups created their name during the application process. And do you know what we saw? Indigenous land stewards leading a gardening project with Toronto Community Housing residents, planting and harvesting and learning together about native plants and traditional medicine. We saw neighbors in Kensington Market coming together in a healing circle to recognize community members that they had lost during the pandemic and to overdoses. We saw a group of Afro-Caribbean teens leading arts workshops to help their new Afghan neighbors navigate culture shock. Story after story of people coming together for their neighbors, their communities, the stranger next door, helping the unseen to feel seen, the disconnected to feel a sense of belonging, and creating opportunities for people to give back in meaningful ways. And the lesson we learned was that people are ready to rebuild in their communities. We just have to open the door to opportunity. Volunteerism and philanthropy can provide necessary infrastructure to resource and enable neighborhood-level leadership if we're dedicated to championing volunteerism at this time. We have to do the work of co-dreaming new systems of civic engagement that sometimes will require us to get out of the way of community action. National Volunteer Week and a federal election are in a couple weeks. I invite us all to consider how we tell new, more diverse stories of volunteerism in Canada at this time. Stories where food security happens at community garden parties and not just at food banks, where pride parades are planned by kids in their neighborhoods and not just by larger institutions, and where teens lead arts programs and choirs and learn that they too have the power to shape their world. Thank you so much for listening to my stories.